for those who don't have a strong foundation in an actual, authentic tradition that includes some aspects of faith. And I know a lot of people don't like that word, but it's a good word. So I'm going to use it. And you're going to hear me use it again tonight. I think that would serve people better in times like these than the sort of supermarket smorgasbord type situation that you described, where people kind of pick and choose things they believe in, or some practices they might do for a while, or some weekend workshops that they might go to, or some books they read, or what have you. I mean, none of those things are in and of themselves bad. They're not. They're actually good, because they show some authentic longing towards like a desire to grow as a person. But those sort of things do not provide one any real comfort or solace in times when people are dying, when people are sick, when people are hungry, when there's war. You know, all of those, because ultimately we all come to a time, you know, whether it's this situation or another, but old age, sickness, and death, they're coming for all of us, because we're human and we're all going to die. And the real question is, when that time comes, what are you going to rely on to face that head on? Because I'm telling you, if you don't have some kind of wisdom backing you up at that point, you're going to end up like most people, like terrified, desperate. That's no way to leave this realm.
Yeah, no, that's no way anybody wants to leave this world, kind of clenching for a sense of hope that you just can't really have any experience of. But just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I feel like a lot of that dread that we feel, at least in this modern society, going back to that word faith, is that people associate that word faith with a literal interpretation of a biblical or religious text and or tradition, right? You have to have faith. You have to completely allow your subjective experience to subvert the objective, right? I mean, the whole idea of the modern interpretation of faith is that you're believing something with an absence of fact, right?
Yeah, that's not the type of faith I'm talking about.
Right, right. And I think that's where the biggest misinterpretation comes for a lot of folks, is that the type of faith, at least when I think of the type of faith, is the type of the type of subjective experience one has with knowing their sense of divine within them, right? You have to take that journey within yourself to the point that you discover this divine essence, and that is this sort of sense of faith or proof that you have of the divine, right? You have to find that within it. You have to find that within yourself. You can't just look for it blindly, relying on the spiritual experiences of others.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many dimensions to this. On a superficial level, it means that a religious tradition has some belief, you could call faith, that there is a divine, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So that's it at like the most basic level. And so when I say talk about faith, I mean that there's also what you described, this sort of recognition that within ourselves there is some connection to this great mystery of whatever it may be. So there's, and I mean that. And there's also the faith and that is developed by exercising skepticism in applying the lessons of teachings and a teacher in spiritual practice over years and over many deeds. And I mean that type of faith as well. And there are others. So I think, and these are all related to one another as well. I don't think these are necessarily like completely distinct types of faith. They all are, it's all connected. But it is ultimately a willingness at some point to trust that, I think, or at least for me at this point, that I just don't know it all myself, that I can't control it, and that on some level there is ultimate meaning. And you're right, it does involve a reframing as well, because I think you have to have a different sort of a view of reality. Because if you say, this, there's just a physical substance, material reality, and I'm a distinct human being that's a subject in a world of separate objects, and when death comes, that's it, there's nothing more. Well, that's entirely nihilistic, and if that's your view, you should definitely fear death. But for someone who has a view that all is the divine, and that this feeling that I exist as a self, while certainly palpable, is really just a misconstruing of reality, and that there is something greater going on, or not going on, as the case may be. And that is sort of like the way I interpret that sort of faith in the divine. I don't know. And it takes many forms, and people grapple with it. And I don't think it's like a static state where either you have faith or you don't. I think that's super simplistic,
Yeah.
almost as simplistic as the way people think of the divine as some old man in the sky, or that the Bible is some kind of literal history, And I think it would behoove us to stay away from those simplistic sort of interpretations, especially, considering what's going on now.
I mean, I don't know. When I think about, taking into account, your kind of perception of faith, I kind of see it as almost a type of growth, right? For you to, achieve this, level of faith, one, you have to reject your ego, right? You have to reject the ego's perception of what is occurring around it, which is limited to sensational perception, right? As well as, whatever might be going on in your personal subconscious at that time in your life, and, the situations that have shaped that, which are, also limited by your senses. So when you're limited in that perception, I don't know, the ego just makes you want to deny that inner divine essence that you have, because it makes you more dependent on it. It makes it seem like it is the end all. And particularly in the spiritual state of the modern world, I feel like a lot of people's egos are winning that battle, because over time, at least the way I view society, we have become more individualistic. We have become more egocentric. Everything is commodified to the point that, people on whether it's either social media or, through their own, business, they try and brand themselves as
Mm.
a commodity as opposed to an individual and a with their own essence of the divine. So I feel like this path of faith, even though it's not like a simplistic literal interpretation of faith, it is a rejection of that notion of the self, and to reject the ego and to reject that limitation on perception and to open your mind to what could be, whether that is found in your imagination or expression, doing art, whether that's through spiritual practices. I mean, it's all about that inward journey. And I don't know, like with everything that's going on, I feel like there is an opportunity for people to kind of use this as a way to reject those labels that people use to define them, right? So right now, if you have lost your job, if you're socially isolated by yourself, it really gives you a chance to reestablish who you are by looking at those labels and how we have chosen to define ourselves. And with those things stripped away, what do you have in your sense of self? What do you have when you can't define yourself by your job or by your friends or by your family, or even, with a lot of churches being shut down, by your, religious identification? When you don't have those self-objectified things that you want to label yourself as, it really strips away those kind of labels that support the ego and how you want to define yourself, and it really brings you to a more centered base of self, if that makes sense.
I think so. I think it does make sense. I mean, I think it would be a good idea for people to reject those sorts of identities that they take on, the career, that's the big one. Um, and I think there's others as well, like, anybody like who's got like a serious hobby is that's another one people put on. Appearance and fashion, like just general appearance is another one. Um, you're right, friends, family, sort of like your socioeconomic status. That's like the cultural background that you have. Like that's another one. And all of these are not. They're so temporary and shift so easily. Like you say, like you don't go out of the house for 2 weeks and all of a sudden like who am I? Like that's unstable, right? So knowing at least and seeing the instability in that, I don't know how one can base their identity in appearance in that way, right?
I mean, I feel culturally that's what we're conditioned to do.
Of course, not even just this culture. It's just a human tendency. And I mean, what I've been taught is really the first mistake is really when, and I think this happens sort of pre-consciousness even, is when the luminosity sort of arises from the emptiness, and there's a perception of like itself and what it's being perceived as different, and that leads into all of this. So the perception itself, I don't think, is actually the problem. And appearance, this realm itself, is not actually the problem. The problem is that our habitual tendency to misconstrue the perception for something that it's not. So that, at least this is what I've been taught, and this is what I practice, and I see much more of a result in approaching reality from this perspective than I did from the nihilistic, materialistic perspective. So I'm not advocating it's for everyone, because I don't think that it is.